This show is made possible by the generous support of listeners just like you. Our show is about helping souls grow, prosper, and evolve, and every gift ensures that we can continue to do this. So we thank our generous supporters and also ask if you would like to be a part of supporting this important effort to bring this message of truth to the world. Please consider heading to experienceofthesoul.com/support to be a part of supporting us by being a regular patron or making a one-time gift. Blessings on the journey, dear friend.
Supportek Staffing and Center for the Healing Arts present The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly show featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 145, Florida's Healing Waters with Rick Kilby. And now your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Hello and welcome to The Authentic Spiritual Journey. My name is Cynthia Alice Anderson. I am the host, and I'm here today in 818 Studios with my producer.
Hello, everybody. This is Dave Croft. Thank you so much for joining us for episode 145 of The Authentic Spiritual Journey. If nobody has said it, let me be the first to welcome you to the week and I hope you had a fantastic weekend. And I know, Alice, that this is going to be a great week for everybody.
Oh, it's going to be a great week. Yeah, happy Monday. We have a great show for you. We've also got a wonderful guest in the studio with us today, Mr. Rick Kilby. Rick, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. I'm a big fan of the show, and it's fun to see how it's made behind the scenes.
Well, I'll tell you, you've been, I think you've been our longest supporter of the show.
That's right.
And we mentioned you, I don't know if you heard it, but a few shows back, we mentioned your long-lasting support. And it means the world to us, obviously, because anytime somebody gives a gift, it doesn't matter, $2, $5, $1,000. Every gift says to us, that what we're doing is important, that it matters, and that it's supporting them on their journey. So, Rick, we're happy that you're a part of the show today and that we've been able to support you on your journey as well.
It's a real pleasure. I do believe what you guys are doing is very important, and I'm glad to be a part of it, even if it's just a small part.
Well, I think a lot of your work, and, I know that not only are you an author, you're also an amazing designer. I've seen, and worked with you in your graphic design. I've been in your studio, in your home, and I'll tell you, you have a lot to give. And I know that all your work is really based in your spiritual journey. I mean, it comes out of that, I guess is the right way to say it.
Yeah, I do believe that's true. It's been an organic process that I really couldn't have anticipated ahead of time, and it when I look back at it now, it's interesting how everything kind of connects going backwards, but I could never have anticipated that.
Right.
And a lot of it has to do with water, but I really believe, water is such a great metaphor because I do believe in the power of being in the flow. And I think that has happened a lot of times in my life where I've been in the flow.
Right. Well, I just realized we started jumping in right away. Dave, give us our show title today.
Well, our show title, we are meeting with Rick Kilby, author of Florida's Healing Waters. So the episode is Florida's Healing Waters with Rick Kilby.
Yes, very, very good. And Rick, I want to get into the book, but I always share with our listeners what my personal connection is with people when they come on the show. And I've had people share, other listeners share how much they like that. They like knowing what the connection is. And so, you and I met, it's probably been about 15 years ago now, and we were part of the same spiritual community. And you've also helped me research some very interesting family history, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I really love history, especially history of the place I'm in, and that's Florida. And for me, the research is the funnest part, absolutely, because it's like going, you're doing a treasure hunt and you find these little nuggets from the past, and there's a great deal of satisfaction when you find what you're looking for. It's a great deal of frustration if you can't find what you're looking for.
Right.
But it's so rewarding, and to me, it helps you appreciate where you are. You have that depth of knowledge, and it makes it so much richer. Even just
Oh,
walking around the neighborhood, if you understand what was there before you, it gives you a depth of experience that you wouldn't have on just based on the superficial.
oh, it's very, very true. And so for our listeners, I'll just share that I feel like Rick and I half the time are going to be speaking in code today. Once you've known somebody a long time, so after I had moved to Orlando, so it was about, I think it's probably been close to 15 years ago now that I moved to Orlando, and early on living here, my mom was telling me a story, and my mom was in early stages of Alzheimer's when I moved here, and so anytime she told a story, it was from her ancient past because her short-term memory was gone mostly, and she was kind of hearkening back to times of when she was a child. Well, out of the blue one day when we were speaking, she explained to me the time when her grandmother had died. And my whole life, I'd never heard this story. And then she said, and then when I woke up the next day, her body had been taken to Orlando. And I said, wait, what? And, I was kind of following this story along. And I knew that my mom had spent time in Orlando as a child because her parents ran a seasonal restaurant. And so they went from Georgia to Florida, like so many people did in those days. They were a little bit of snowbirds, although only coming from Georgia, but still a lot of people did that in those days. So as it turns out, her father and grandfather, which means my grandfather and great-grandfather, I found out had both been ministers here in Orlando. And I had not known that when I moved here. So in that little story that my mom told, and then, by the way, 5 minutes later, I don't think she could have recounted it. So I felt like the story was right from God for me to establish a bigger connection with Orlando, and Rick was a part of that. So the first thing I did was call the oldest cemetery in town, which of course is Greenwood Cemetery. And I gave their names, and they said, "Yeah, they're here." And I said, "What?" My great grandparents are buried 5 minutes from where I live. So then Rick, and then take over with what you helped me find. Do you remember all that?
Yeah, there had been a church, and I think the church was in what was called Fairvilla, which there were a number of little towns that
Right.
are now part of Orlando.
Right.
Fairvilla, Wilcox was one. Where College Park was a completely different town. Now they're all part of the greater Orlando. And at some point, the church was moved, and I think we actually found the
Yes.
building as it exists today. Maybe it's a chapel, a part of another church.
It is. It's at a Haitian Methodist church. It's actually their fellowship hall, but it is still standing. The original church is still standing, and I was able to go in it. And I have been invited, I don't know if I told you this, Rick, to go speak there, to speak in that building. And to speak for the church. So we'll see if that happens. But it was a great finding, and it did give me a greater connection to Orlando and to my past. And I think your book does that as well, Florida's Healing Waters. Like as I look through it, I'm imagining some of my family members probably being in some of these spots. And then I guess it's kind of a subtitle or descriptor on the cover. It says, Gilded Age Mineral Springs, Seaside Resorts, and Health Spas. And I can just see the people gathering at that time, for healing. We didn't have the medicine we had today. So there was a strong, strong belief, right, in the healing power of water.
Yeah, it's a very, very ancient tradition. I think in most cultures across the world, there's a belief in the healing powers of water. And there's kind of a shift is after when we got to the age of enlightenment and people started to pay more attention to science and believe into science, it kind of went from sacred spirituality was causing the healing power of water to the chemical composition of the water. So they looked for water that had things like sulfur and iron and things like that, because that was the beginning where we started to turn away from belief in gods and goddesses inhabiting the water, or they could be saints, that made the water holy, into, it was science and it was the stuff there. And there was a shift in what we believed, but there was still the belief that water could cause healing. And, the medicine of the 19th century, much of it was still, bleeding and purging and patent medicine and all these horrible alternatives. So if I lived in the 19th century and I had an option between being bled or having leeches attached to me or having some horrible patent medicine that would make me sicker or perhaps addicted, I would definitely take the healing waters. And I think a lot of people did. And there's that connection. It's very well established in ancient Europe, and a lot of people who had still their families had connections to ancient Europe. It was part of their family tradition to take the waters, and taking the waters is what I write about. It's soaking in and drinking the water from mineral springs, and sometimes seawater actually too.
Yes, that's very, very true. That's very true. Some of my family history, too, is from an area in North Carolina called Hot Springs, which, of course, in the name, that there are hot springs there. And I've participated in several things around the water there. And, in reading your book, though, I learned a lot about Florida, and I'm surprised that this information has not been more available. So I think you were writing the book, clearly it comes out of your passion, but I think also it's going to be a real resource for people to kind of do their own, what's the word, kind of pilgrimage to find some of these areas. And, I don't know, kind of investigate's not quite the right word, but experience some of these things for themselves and investigate some of this. There's something, it's like finding this forgotten treasure. That's the overall feeling when I was looking at your book is, there's this like forgotten treasure that we have as a part of our natural resource in Florida.
That's music to my ears, because if people would do that, nothing would make me happier, because that's kind of the journey that I did. Once I learned about these places, I really made attempts to go to these places in person. And I went as far as Bath, England, in order to take the waters there and to experience water that had been seen as sacred, going back to before the Romans were there. The ancient Celts were the first one to discover the springs there. So I did that in addition to Florida, all over the country, in order to better understand what it was like and to feel it for myself. And I really do believe, it really, you feel it in a different way. There's a level of relaxation when you take the waters that's different. It's very much like you feel after meditation. It's just kind of, it puts you in a different place. I went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and did all the hydrotherapeutic treatments there. And I felt just like jello afterwards. In fact, my wife did it, and so we had to separate, and I was waiting for her to get finished. And I was sitting in a chair outside, and somebody came up and they were smoking. And it felt so impure, because I felt like I was, a sponge. And just completely made out of jello, and like they didn't even have any bones in my body. And somebody came up and was smoking, and it felt so impure and awful. But it's remarkable. It's a remarkable thing, and there are alternatives to it today. One day I was driving to church, and I saw this big billboard on Orange Avenue of somebody at this place called Float Spa or Indigo Spa.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
And I thought, well, here it is today. This is in the 21st century doing these ancient practices, and it's the same thing. And they use Epsom salt, which is, based in a spa in Epsom, England. And it's the same stuff. It's the same minerals that people have been soaking in and bathing in for hundreds of years. And it's so, that tradition has not died. It just kind of changed.
Oh, that's very, very true. And I've experienced several of those.
Those are like sensory deprivation things, right? And that kind of what's like indigo float, I think. So would when people would go to these healing waters, did they kind of invoke some of the sensory deprivation, like at night or earplugs?
I don't think that. I think, well, for one thing, as we got later in the 19th century, a lot of it was social, and it started in these places that were probably original Roman baths, and then they were rediscovered in the Age of Enlightenment, and when we discovered these classical traditions. But then a whole society, went to these watering places. So it's what you did. Gotcha. So there was a big societal, cultured people. They went into these watering places and took the waters. But I do believe, I found this great example at the History Center of these people who were very wealthy. They owned a brewery up in Pennsylvania, and they came to Florida in 1893 in order to take the waters. And the man, his name was Charles Kyer, was probably a consumptive, which means he had tuberculosis, and they sought the waters just for healing. It wasn't about the society aspects of it, and they went all up and down the state looking for one place that would help bring relief. And the doctor, that's kind of what happened in the 19th century. The doctor said, go to Florida because it's good for you. It's warm weather. You won't have to get through another cold winter. And a lot of the places in the north where they came from were starting to be polluted. And Florida was kind of pure in a tropical wilderness. And a lot of the springs here that we see as freezing cold in winter were considered warm springs, like hot springs where you came from. And they would come here in order to experience the hot springs in winter.
Yes, exactly. Well, the thing too, and I don't want to get you too off track with what you're saying, but I could not believe that Ralph Waldo Emerson the father of transcendentalism, was supposedly healed, right? Or his health was, as your book says, restored by his time in Florida. I had not ever heard that.
Yeah, it's a great story. When I find stories like that, I find ways to get them in the book because,
I was like,
who
what?
knew
Right.
Emerson was in St. Augustine, and he had such an interesting experience because it was in the 1820s. So, even St. Augustine was very undeveloped in the 1820s.
Yes.
And he talks about walking along the beach and hitting an orange with a stick, but he also talks about hearing a slave auction. So he's at a Bible study group, and next door they're having a slave auction, and he was struck by, just how different those two aspects of consciousness were. And I think it had a big effect on him.
Yes, I think so. And there's so much great stuff in the book. And I don't want to forget, though, to take you back to a phrase you keep using called taking the waters.
You picked up on that too.
Yeah, I love that because
I love the way that...
I had heard that years ago, and I had completely forgotten about it. And as you're saying it, so just for our listeners, I think I know what it means, but tell our listeners what taking the waters means.
It means it really derived from the tradition of going to mineral springs and soaking in and then drinking the water as well. But I kind of extended it to mean sea bathing, which, was a similar practice, and then hydrotherapy, which really kind of came out of the balneotherapy is soaking in spring water. And the hydrotherapy tradition came out of that as well. So there were water cure establishments, and then that kind of led to the sanitarium movement, which was another aspect of taking the waters in a more modern aspect. And then, I do think we still take the waters today, but most of it is seen as recreational bathing and swimming. But I do believe underpinning all that is the belief that being in water is good for us.
Oh yes, most definitely. And there's so much about water. Water is healing. Water is powerful. We can't live without it. For long. And so just water as an element is probably the most powerful element because we're also, I can't remember what it is, 86% our bodies are...
I think it's like 76% or something like that. Or maybe that's the world.
Anyway, we're largely water. Our bodies. So yes, I think there is a tremendous healing power of water. And I'm sure you're familiar with this, Rick, but in terms of the practice of literally getting special water shipped in, but there's whole mineral treatments now that you can get, and of course it's they're quite expensive, but there are companies, as you say, that have made this whole process a little more scientific. And years ago, I had a health challenge where I had gotten this really bad heat stroke, and I learned from a doctor that I needed minerals. The reason I wasn't healing faster is basically all the minerals had been stripped from my body. And so I had to take these certain highly mineral concentrated waters, and I do credit that with a great deal of my healing. So I think we can't minimize some of the power of the minerals in the water.
I'd never heard that story. That's remarkable. I did come across places that offer IVs that have a lot of those same things in there, and it's kind of a big thing. And what struck me was there was a place in Jacksonville offering the Fountain of Youth treatment, that would restore all those minerals in your body via IV. And it seems so weird. For me, IVs are associated with fear of going to the doctor and having surgery or something, but these people are doing them willingly, is trying to restore balance in their bodies.
Well, yes, it was very necessary for me, and still about once a year, I do a quote unquote water treatment. So I haven't talked a lot about that part of my journey just because it's been so personal, but I felt like I wanted our listeners to know because so many of our listeners are spiritual seekers. They're about healthy lifestyles, and what I love about your book and what I love about this topic is that it's going to open up a new awareness for people that there's things we can do to aid the healing in our bodies that doesn't cost a lot of money. And especially now that we can go out and be in these waters and be safe and also be doing something really, really good for our health. And I do believe too, as we, take in all these minerals for healing, that healing happens on every level. So whatever we do that helps the body, helps the mind and the soul as well, because we are, our body is part of the great whole that we are. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit more with Rick as we come back and hear a little bit more about his journey. So Rick, thanks so much for being with us. We're going to take a break real quick to hear a word from our sponsors.
We'll return to the program in just a few moments, but first, we wanted to give a special word of thanks to our podcast partners, Supportek Staffing. Supportek Staffing is an innovative staffing agency built on the principle of caring about employers and employees as they navigate these new workforce and workplace challenges. If you're an employer, they want to be your human resource partner and help with the changes needed during the pandemic. If you're a candidate, they want to become your lifelong career agent to help you grow into your fullest potential. Supportek prioritizes support over volume, integrity over profits, and will treat your business and your career as if it was their own. You can learn more at supportekstaffing.com. That's SUPPORTEK staffing.com. And finally, we want to give a special word of thanks to Center for the Healing Arts. Center for the Healing Arts is one of the first dedicated group practices devoted to challenging, supportive, and nurturing therapy. Their dedicated therapists have a wide range of expertise, including relationship and couples therapy, individual therapy, addictions, neurofeedback, play therapy for children, adolescents, and families, and therapy for blended family issues. They also regularly offer day-long intensive workshops for relationships, addiction recovery, adult children of alcoholics, and healing trauma in the LGBTQ+ community. For more information, head over to centerforthehealingarts.com or call 407-657-8555, extension 1. We now return you to this week's episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey with your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Welcome back. We're glad you're with us. We hope that you are learning right along with us today.
I've already learned something.
Oh, you did? What was it?
I was today years old when I realized that Epsom salt came from a place. It makes sense. The word Epsom, that doesn't mean anything. Obviously, it's a place, but yeah, I learned. The more you know, I learned that today.
Perrier, Evian, all those bottled waters are places too.
I knew about
healing
that.
Spas.
Right, and Aquafina. I'm just kidding.
Zephyr Hills.
Yeah.
But Epsom salt? Yeah, of course, Dave.
Well, Rick, tell us a little bit about that. Educate us even more on that. Do you know?
The word spa comes from Spa, Belgium, where, again, it was an ancient Roman bath there. And it was one of the first to kind of be rediscovered and have these big facilities built around in the Gilded Age that attracted all these people to go. And, there's debate over what the word spa means, but it basically means bathing, and there's different origins. It could be Latin, it could be from Belgian language, we're not sure. But there's places all over the world like that we've come to associate with other things that really go back to ancient baths.
Yes, most definitely. And I wanted to circle back in terms of this, some of the spiritual realities of some of the things we're talking about. So an Epsom bath, yes, it can give you a great dose of magnesium and can be very relaxing for you. A lot of times after an intense workshop or intensive that I've done, I will tell my participants, hey, you know what? Go put a cup of Epsom salts in your bath and soak, and let that be a release. And so what happens is there's something with that chemical process that it helps release toxins also from the body, and then it refills you with all that good magnesium and all that good energy. So it is very, very relaxing, and it helps release energy, as well. So I just want to mention that it's not only, you don't have to necessarily trek through the woods to find a spring. You can actually do this in your bathtub at home by using, say the Epsom salts and things like that. So there's healing can be found, in your very own home by, implementing some of these practices.
Are there other minerals beyond Epsom that would kind of do this same kind of thing, like a mineral bath?
Well, Rick, do you want me to answer that, or did you want?
I think Epsom salt is what is it, magnesium sulfate or something like that?
Yeah,
it's in my book.
Well,
you're going to have to read the book.
Well, the other thing that is a great clearing is a pound of sea salt and a pound of soda. It sounds like a baking soda, like the orange box, but a pound of sea salt and a pound of soda are also very, very good for cleansing. And you can even add a little Himalayan salt, or you can add a little Epsom salt to that as well. But if I've done really intensive work, I will do that bath as well. And believe it or not, you can almost see the water change color. It's like pulls out. The water all of a sudden is gray, and it's not the chemicals reacting. It's this pulling this energy out of the body. So that can also be a very cleansing bath to do. And, a lot of people now, too, use essential oils and all that. For one, you have to be careful, because if it's real oily, you're going to fall the next time you get in the tub. The other thing is, there's just, I don't know, you can do too much. I mean, it's like a drop of an oil, fine, but if you're doing the salts and the oils, I mean, it's like, your body doesn't know what to do, to hold or release. So, so I think sometimes now they've just become perfumes rather than healing. And so we don't want to minimize like the natural healing properties of the minerals in the water. So the minerals I take, they're from like, I don't know, the sea in Spain or something. They're from a very specific area. They have certain sea minerals that like I need for my body. So, but there are mineral baths certainly that you can do. And like we were saying, there's also those new places where you can go do the float. I can't remember the name of it. Maybe it's just called Indigo Float?
It's Indigo Float, the one here.
Yeah.
I got Shannon a gift certificate for Christmas last year.
Oh, did she do it?
She's not done it yet because COVID happened. And
no. Well, I want to do it.
So,
I do too.
Well, Rick, I was going to say, I think I'm going to create some business for you and say you need to create these little excursions to these places, because a lot of people would not do this on their own. But if they had like a fearless leader charging through, I'm imagining you with like a little wood. Josh always walks with a little a staff through the woods, like trekking,
like Gandalf,
Yeah, exactly.
You're gonna have to work on your beard though. It's not nearly long.
Well, I have to say I have beard envy, Dave. It's remarkable what you've got going on there.
Thank you.
Well,
I would look like Santa Claus if my beard was that big, though.
Well, I wasn't going to say like Gandalf. I was going to say like Humboldt, who was very. I guess that was late 1800s, early 1900s. Rick, who. Basically, all our national parks, even though Humboldt was a German, who came over here and said, "Look, in Europe they were so happy for all their buildings and commerce, and he came to the U.S. and said, look, your forests are your and they had their cathedrals, and he came to the U.S. and said." Your cathedrals are outdoors, So I feel like we need somebody to help us charge through and lead the way.
I would be way into that. I remember one year, CC, you did a kayak thing at Wekiva Springs.
I love that. Yes, I did.
And man, like you in a canoe or kayak, and given like historical facts and everything, that's fascinating. Shannon and I would be first.
I would be too. I would be too.
I would love to do it. I'm just waiting for COVID to get done, because I like yesterday, I went to a place called Green Spring, just over the bridge across from Sanford, and it is the most remarkable looking place because it's this incredible jade color, and it's kind of a milky jade. A lot of our springs are transparent, but it's a milky jade, like because of the minerals. So and depending on the weather and the sunlight, it will change color. So sometimes it's more turquoise, but yesterday it looked just like a piece of jade set on the landscape.
Beautiful.
And I'd love to take people there to see it because most people don't know about it.
Well, Rick, tell us a little bit about, too, because so many of our listeners are in Florida, and even if they're not in Florida, they'd love to hear about Wekiva, right? Wekiva is such a well-known spot here in Central Florida, and yeah, I used to go there nearly every day. It's just so beautiful out there. Have you done much research on Wekiva and work there, or what's your thought on that place?
It's actually in the book. It was originally called Clay Springs because the first people to own it. And here's the thing that everybody gets wrong. It's the Wekiva River with a V.
I know, Wekiva. Right.
Springs.
Yes, exactly.
And it goes back to the Creek language, but how it got the V and the W switched is an object of contention because I think it was just a typographical error more than anything. What I've learned, though, is it had an important role in terms of commerce before it became a healing water place. Most of these places are attributed to having significance to the Native Americans here, whether it was the Seminoles were mostly Creeks who came down in the 1700s, or the people thousands of years before that. And I think they've done archaeological digs at most of the springs. And a lot of them have shell mounds and middens, which are some were burial spots and some were for religious ceremonies around the springs. But when they first started using the people of European descent, it was a place for them to get access to the St. Johns River because that's how commerce went back and forth. There were no railroads, and the roads weren't very helpful at all because they were so bad. So they had to get to the river. So they brought stuff, all the citrus and stuff that they grew around here, and they went to Wekiva Springs, and they were able to get it on a steamboat eventually and take it up to Jacksonville. And then once they got to Jacksonville, it could go up and down the seaboard. But at some point, somebody decided they would try and establish it as a healing spa, and they named it Tanya Wahatha, which supposedly meant healing waters. I think a lot of these people just made up the names.
I know.
And so for a brief time, it was marketed as a place of healing and with a hotel, and the guy had visions of this whole town being established there, and it never really played out. But I think eventually it became more of a recreational facility like it is now. A lot of the springs that eventually kind of morphed into recreational facilities from these places of healing.
Right. Well, it is a beautiful springs. If you've never been there, it is a great kayak trip. It is a great canoe trip, and you can just also sit at the kind of sit on the edge there. And there's a lot of different areas that are real easy to experience the water of Wekiva River, and you're absolutely right about that. And the other piece I wanted to say about that, too, I know it does flow. Is it into Blue Springs? Because, the thing about water that I find fascinating, I like to think about these things, is that, like, all water basically is connected. That, like, there's, like, the water that's here now is the same water that was here when Jesus walked the earth. All it does is cycle in itself. It moves around. It's brought up to the clouds. It's brought back down in another area. And so all the water, like, ultimately is connected. Like, that's interesting to me that the power of water in our lives, we have to have it to live. We have to have it literally to exist. And there's fights over water, in certain parts of the country. Like, I used to live in Phoenix. So, there's not enough water because there's 200 golf courses in the desert, So there's a lot of energy about water. And so, I don't know, I think it plays probably it plays some kind of mystical role that I think we're not totally tuned into yet.
That would be another thing I would love to come out of this book, is to change the way we perceive water itself. I think it's the ultimate spiritual metaphor. We have to have it to live. The flow aspect of it. There's, in some ways we don't understand it completely. There are, it's hydrogen and oxygen, and it's this essential thing that we need to live. And if you look at the foundation myth of most religions involve water. In Genesis, and then the rituals like baptism and ablution, and across cultures all across the globe, spirituality and water are tied together. And I love the idea of believing in the sacredness of water. If people would do that today, maybe we would take better care of it.
Well, that I wanted to end with that piece. Two things, Rick, for you to share with us. And one was about what can the basic person do in terms of taking better care of our water, because I think in general there's not a lot of understanding that there's a need, that there is more pollution than we can even imagine. People don't understand that some of our current practices are polluting the very thing that we need to live.
Part of the challenge is water's so cheap. We take it for granted. You just open the faucet and it just flows, and we don't even think about it's money going down the drain. And eventually we may get to a point where water becomes more expensive, and I think we'll do better. And conservation usage has increased in the 21st century, so we're doing a better job. But what we're not doing a better job is the other end of it, where everybody has to have the perfect lawn. Especially here in Florida, they put fertilizer all over their yards, especially in summer, and it washes down and eventually goes into the aquifer, which is the source of our drinking water, and comes back up as being polluted. So one of the things that I always push people towards is trying to get rid of that St. Augustine grass and planting more native plants that don't require watering and they don't require fertilizer, because for one thing, you're establishing a habitat in your backyard and not just using it for ornamental purposes. Grass is an invasive plant. It's not, St. Augustine grass does not come from Florida.
Right.
But if you replace it with native plants, you're going to have butterflies, you're going to have bugs, you're going to have bees, you're going to have birds. All that stuff that really needs your help right now, you can turn your own backyard into a mini national park.
Mm.
Well, you know what? There is also a new certification. I'm trying to remember what it's called, but it is I think it's called a certified natural habitat that you can get for your home. There is a new certification. I saw a home downtown that had it, and I'm going to look into it for my home as well, because I'm creating a beautiful backyard oasis at my, in my new home. And I'm trying to figure out, I'll be honest, I want to say this on the air to help me stay on this. So I live in an area near what used to be Fern Creek, right? That was a major creek in the area where I live. And just not too far from me, I can tell by all the foliage and all the green that there used to be a spring there. And so I asked somebody about it who'd lived there a long time, and they said, oh, yes, that was part of such and such, and, Fern Creek. And then the lake near where I live is actually fed by a spring. So I'm going to do some more work finding that out, because when I lived in Seattle, this one teacher, she was a science teacher, she helped restore salmon to a salmon run. And then it started this movement all over Washington to restore some of the salmon runs, because of deforestation and, quote unquote progress. The streams had been so de-treed around the streams that the salmon eggs, couldn't live, and so it destroyed salmon runs. Well, one teacher, I'm saying this repeatedly, that one person, just with the idea to restore salmon to the stream, completely changed the entire habitat. Trees were planted, eggs were placed in the stream, and salmon returned every year. And I'm thinking, we all have a little more time because we're all home right now. What if we could use some of this time to improve the environment in which we live? Everybody knows that to have a green, quote unquote, green environment is healthier for the people. Why would we not try to restore the streams, the natural areas, so that we could all benefit? Because, Rick, as you say, what we're doing is the opposite. Anything we put on our ground, we're actually drinking. Right? And so when you start thinking that, it's really changes how you view your relationship to the earth.
Yeah, and I found a link to, it's actually USDA.gov in partnership with the Audubon Society about backyard conservation, including a backyard pond, wetland, composting, mulching, terracing, tree planting, water conservation, wildlife habitat. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. The other aspect of water, you said backyard pond, is I think maybe it's a cellular thing, just looking at or being near or gazing water, I really feel like you respond to it. And I don't know that it's entirely a conscious thing. This weekend, my wife and I went on a hike, and it's this place in Deltona that's undisturbed, which is remarkable. And there's these ephemeral ponds in there. And it seemed like getting to the ponds was kind of the payoff. Like the whole hike was built around seeing the water feature. And I think about the hikes that I've been going on lately. The payoff is always seeing the water feature because, it's a lake or a river or something like that. It just feels good. And I'm fortunate enough to live near water and look at it every day. And I can sense just looking at the water, it makes a difference in the way my energy shifts.
Right.
And I, the one thing in my book is the map of Florida at night, and you see how the lights trace the coast because people want to live on the water where they can see it every day. And we have all these lakes, and you live near a creek.
Right.
I know the creek you're talking about. I've never been able to find the exact course that it took, but I've always wanted to.
Yeah, well, I think we've given ourselves a divine appointment here.
Yeah, feels like a hike is in your future.
It totally does. It totally does. Well, and Rick, that's, our journeys have always been connected in beautiful ways, and I know that will continue. And I know for me, water is healing. Water is God. Water is, as we say, mostly what we're made of. So we know water is holy. And I agree that when you look at water, you feel better, right? And the soul operates ultimately in image and in feeling. And I think that's where water comes in. So you've had a very powerful journey. You've really brought us a gift by telling us a little bit more about your journey and about your journey to your book. And I want to mention, we'll put all this in the show notes with where to get Rick, with where to get your book. And what's really neat in it, too, are some of the historical photos. I don't think I've ever seen this many beautifully done. Clearly, you've done some restoration or recoloring or something to these. But the photos are amazing, and they give you a real sense of time past. And also, it brings us into the 21st century, with what we can do to be a part of Florida's healing waters, and to see that those continue. So anyway, Rick, thank you so much for being on our show. Again, Rick Kilby's book is called Florida's Healing Waters. And friends, as always, we thank you for joining us. We feel so honored, so blessed that you continue to join us for your spiritual journey. Just know that we see you loved, supported, and blessed, praying always for God's highest and best in your life. Many blessings.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey presented by Supportek Staffing and Center for the Healing Arts. This channel is also made possible because of listeners just like you. If you would like to support the channel with your tax-deductible contribution on an ongoing basis or through a one-time gift, head over to experienceofthesoul.com/support. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2021 Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission from R.R. Hot Publishing. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.